Hey team, Matt Jones. First thing I want to do is apologize. I did not think through the fact that I was going to be on camera recording today, and I wore the very kind of shirt you don't ever want to wear when you're recording because it just doesn't all look right. So I apologize for that. I also want to apologize that today's lesson is going to go pretty note heavy. It's a fairly simple idea, but it's going to take you taking some notes, and I don't think I can get all those up on the screen because the computer that I would typically use for all that editing is wrapped up in editing a whole nother video right now. So all of that to say, I hope you're ready. I hope you have a pen and some paper together, but we're going to jump in on a very particular topic. As I've talked with a couple of y'all and watched some of the online comments, there seems to be still a little bit of people getting stuck around the sense of how do I craft a story? How is it that I can tell what I want to tell? And so today what I'm going to do is just in a very simple, straightforward manner, teach you the process that I use and that others use as well of how to craft a teaching narrative. And what I mean is if you have a how-to or if there's something you want to teach somebody, that this is the narrative that goes with it. Now there may be some other things that you could be teaching on mastermind.com or through the other platforms that you're going to be learning about later on this week through Lyle and the incredible opportunity you have to learn from him. There may be some other things that aren't necessarily a how-to, it may be more of a, it's not necessarily a mental construct how-to, it's how to do something physically, and that wouldn't apply to this. So this is really mental construct. And so what you do with this, and the number one thing you do, there's going to be five basic steps. So number your page out 1 to 5 as we go through this. So number one is that you want to start with your main point. You want to figure out if they don't understand anything else from what I say, what do I want them to understand? Now, very clearly, I'm not using the word, what do I want them to know or what do I want them to hear? Because there's a world of difference between what people hear and think they know and what they really understand or you want them to understand. So what is this concept or principle that you're wanting them to understand at the end of everything? To where if you met them and they were having a conversation with you and they were to say, I so appreciated that you did that video, I now understand, fill in the blank. What would you have in that blank? So all of that is, what is the main point? That's all under the number one. What is your main point? All right, number two, what are 3 things that support or go into making that main point true or possible? What are 3 things that go into making that main point true or possible? So you've got your main point, and now you're thinking about 3 things that you would say, okay, in order for this to happen, 1, 2, 3, these things need to happen, or these are the things that support that main point. All right, so number 1 is your main point, and number 2 are the 3 legs that support the main point. So then you have those 3 things. And once you have those 3 things, what you're going to do now is move on to number 3, and you're going to answer what stories or supporting evidence are there for those 3 things. And I know this is a lot of numbers that we're getting into here, so I apologize for that. So you've got these 3 legs now, and what you want to do is you want to come up with 2 stories or illustrations or points of evidence that make each of those legs true. So you've got the main point, which would be like the top of a table. You've got 3 legs supporting your main point, and on those 3 legs, you have at least 2 things that make those solid and true. What is your evidence that supports that those things are actually true, or what are stories about those that can help people to understand those on a better level? So once you've done that, you've actually got a framework for a pretty good teaching content. So what you're going to do now is you're going to, now that you've thought through all of that, you're going to find an illustration that actually pulls all of that together to where it makes sense. Now the reason that you're doing that at this point is that you've thought through all those pieces. So what are those common threads? How could you do that? I'm going to give an example of this when we get done on a talk that I've been working on. So you're going to think about what is an illustration that could kind of sum all of that up to where you would say, so based on these stories and these legs and this is how your life would be different. This is how your life would be better, right? So how can you sum all of that up? And that's where you want to come up with a great illustration or story that goes with that. Once you have, that's number 4. And then the 5th thing, number 5 that you're going to do, and this seems odd because it's actually going to be the thing that goes at the front of your talk, but the last thing you want to do is you want to come up with a story of someone who needs to know that. You want to come up with a story of someone who needs to know this main point and all the supporting evidence behind that. And the reason that you want to do that at the end is because now you have thought through exactly what you're going to want to teach, and that way you know your story, your lead-off story, will be the correct thing. So when you put it all together, the last thing you do, number 5, actually becomes the first thing you talk about when you go into training. And so you lead off with a story. Stories are just the best way to lead off. And we've learned that from Dean and Tony, where you begin talking about that, and that's kind of that hook. You tell them it could be your story. It could be someone in your family. It could be somebody you know. It could be someone that you've taught. But you tell their story, but you craft the story at the end because you know now what you're trying to teach. A lot of people make the mistake of trying to start with that hook or with that story, and then they're kind of scrambling to try and make everything fit the story, and it really works better the other way around. So you may have a story that motivated you to teach this, but it may not be the best story. You know, a lot of times when we hear something or we experience something, we're motivated to learn and explore, and so we might be 3 or 4 steps away from that original problem that our solution solves. So what you want to do is make sure that there's not 3 or 4 steps between those, and the way you do that is by figuring out what story you want to tell about someone's life, the problem that it faced, that would fit exactly with what you're trying to teach. So number 1, main point. Number 2 is the 3 legs that support the main point. Number 3 is a couple of things that support that, that give evidence or stories around each of those legs. Number 4 is a concluding illustration that wraps all of that up into a success story. And then number 5 is the pain story that someone has to where they need to know about this main point. So here is a quick view of that, not the end result, but me taking through the process with real tangible things. One of the things that I'm working on right now is a series called Rational Relationships, and it's on this concept that a lot of our relationships are very reactionary, which tends towards emotionalism, and that oftentimes the things that we're trying to communicate get lost in the emotional energy around all that, and that there's ways that we can be relationships that we can focus on rational stuff to do that. And one of those things I'm really focusing on, this is just background, is parents and conversations with teenagers, because that's a time of high irrationality. And so one of the modules within that is a series on preparing your kids, preparing your teens for issues related to drugs, alcohol, gambling, pornography, eating disorders, those kind of things, like the big kind of scary things, right? So those are conversations that if you can have rational conversations, you can help a lot. So the way that I look at this, the big thing I want them to take away from all that is that thinking and speaking about drugs, alcohol, gambling, porn, those type of things as scams or traps is the best way to prepare your teen to deal with them. Thinking about those things as scams or traps is the best way to prepare your teen to deal with those things. And I think scam may be an international term, but you know, that's when someone's trying to rip you off. They're offering you something and they're really not delivering that, right? So that's my main point. So 3 legs underneath that support that. Number 1, they pretend to solve a problem, but they really don't. All of those pretend to solve a problem, but they really don't. Number 2, they take more than they give. They take more than they give. And then number 3, they distort reality. So those are the 3 legs that support my main premise, that speaking to your teens in terms of drugs, alcohol, porn, eating disorders, all being scams or traps. That's what I support those. And so now that I've got those 3 legs, I'm looking for evidence that will support each of those legs. And so they pretend to solve a problem. So oftentimes people will indulge, especially teenagers, they'll say, I'm more socially comfortable, I'm more fun, I'm better in that environment if I've taken a drug that calms me down, if I've been smoking pot, or if I've been drinking or drugging, or those kind of things. So that would be one of my things, is that they feel like they're more socially adept in situations. The other thing that I would say that goes along with that one on pretending to solve a problem is that people believe that they're more fun when they're taking these drugs, because that's how they feel. They feel like life is better and life is fun, right? Those kind of things. So those would be the kind of the 2 supporting evidences, is that people take these because they feel like the problem they have is being solved, that they're socially anxious, or they're not having a good time. And so if they take drugs, drink, whatever, then all of a sudden those problems are solved. Number two, they take more than they give. Well, the problem with that is that even though you may feel like those things are true, number one, they lower your inhibitions, and so you're more likely to do things that you would not do, things that you regret later on, which actually ends up with more problems than that. And then number two is they can also become a crutch to deal with difficult times, and so that's how they begin to take more than they give. So where you think it's helping you, it's actually not helping you. It's making you dependent upon something else in order to deal with difficulty. So those are just 2 quick points. Then the third one is that they distort reality. And this is when I really have fun when I'm talking about pornography with people on that, is number one, yeah, people really don't look like that naked. Like if you think everybody that you're ever around or that you're going to be dating or you're going to be with is going to look like that, you're going to be really, really disappointed. So they distort reality. And the other part of it is that what you're seeing in pornography, that's just not normal sexual activity any more than the Kardashians are an example of what normal life looks like, right? These are scripted realities. The stuff that you see, that's not norm. And so if you have that as a view of what reality is going to be, you're going to be very, very disappointed as time goes on and reality plays out. So those would be 2 things that support each of the 3 legs of my general premise. All right, so now we move on to what would be item number 4. So when you choose, so this is the kind of summing everything up. So when you choose to deal with challenges by taking drugs, alcohol, gambling, you actually set yourself up, or you're scamming yourself. You're actually not just letting other people take advantage of you, you're taking advantage of yourself. Number 1, you didn't really solve the problem. Number 2, you now have a mess that you've got to deal with. And number 3, reality isn't what you expected, right? So that would be a very quick illustration of how I would wrap all of those up on why you want to do that. And then I said what I'd do then is number 5, I would try and think of a story that would be the perfect setup for the people that I'm wanting to say this to. And so my setup would be, I was talking to some parents of a 13-year-old lately who for the first time had discovered that their son had been drinking. They knew it wasn't a big problem yet, but they were concerned that it would be a bigger issue in the future because their family actually has issues with alcohol and other addictive personality issues and disorders. And so as I was talking to that family, I began to explain to them that lecturing your child on the evils of alcohol, drugs, or a whole bunch of other things typically isn't effective. But what you can do, because most people don't want anybody to take advantage of them, what you can do is begin to think in these things in terms of scams or traps. Just like no one wants to fall for a scam where someone has gotten their credit card or their debit card information and been able to take advantage of them through something that looked good but really wasn't bad, or people have become trapped in a situation that they would never have walked into. People don't want to get caught up in these things. They just don't recognize them as scams or traps. They simply see them as things they've been lectured about by their parents. So this would be my suggestion for you and for them as parents, and that is that you teach your kids to think of these things as scams and traps, not just things that you don't like. So that would be my setup story. And you can imagine that that would be how I would introduce my whole teaching thing. Would be the other day I was talking, my video would begin with me saying, the other day I was talking to some parents of a 13-year-old who had just discovered that their son had been drinking. And I would unpack that and I would make that main point that you want to teach these. And then I would drop into those 3 legs. And here's the things that you'd want to focus on in order to teach your kids to see these things as traps and scams. Number 1 is that they don't really solve the problems. And you can kind of see how that unfolds and goes through that. Now that's a very simple way to put together a teaching message that I use and a lot of other people use as well. And then once you have all that, you flesh it out, you write it out, and then you go back and you just kind of continue to edit and change stories. And I would encourage you, at least this is what I do, I talk to people about it. Like just when I'm out at conversation, say, hey, I'm working on a teaching with parents about this particular issue. And I'll give them a couple illustrations, say, hey, does that make sense or resonate with you, with what you experienced when you were a parent or as a kid or whatever? And I get feedback and I get stories and I put that information in and I kind of work it all until I'm ready to put this into a teaching time. So that I hope will be something that will help you kind of put together that content, the knowledge, the experiences that you've had, into a way that kind of flows and makes sense to be able to construct a narrative, a teaching narrative that people can benefit from. So if you are working on yours, if you're just still at that point where you've kind of figured out who you want to talk to and you're getting that, I hope this will be a really great thing. Again, there's a lot more that goes into developing a great course, and there's tremendous resources out there, but this should be a really good starting point for you to be able to put all this together. If you have any questions, just drop something down in the comments. I'll do the best that I can to answer those. But I'm Matt Jones, and I hope this helps.